August 7, 1944. The fields of Normandy lay bathed in the soft, deceptive light of early dawn. To the east of Mortain, in the narrow lanes and orchards of the Bocage country, hundreds of German tanks and vehicles stirred like awakening beasts. The air carried the familiar smells of war. Diesel fumes, hot oil, cordite residue from distant artillery. Engines coughed, then settled into a low, steady growl. Tracks clanked against stone walls as columns formed up in the darkness that still clung to the hedgerows. These were no ordinary formations. This was the concentrated might of what remained of Germany's armored elite in the West. Panzer Group West, under General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Eberbach, but on this morning commanded directly by the ambitions of the Führer himself. The spearheads included the rebuilt Panzer-Lehr division under Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein, one of the Reich's most experienced armored commanders, a veteran of Poland, France, Africa, and now Normandy. Beside them rolled the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the 2nd SS Das Reich, elements of the 116th Panzer Division, and supporting Kampfgruppen from the 17th SS and others. In total, over 250 tanks and assault guns, Panther SFGs with their long 75mm guns, a handful of the feared Tigers, dozens of Panzer IVs, Sturmgeschütz assault guns, plus half-tracks, trucks, and whatever motorized infantry could be mustered. The men inside those steel hulls were not conscripts. They were survivors, crews who had learned their trade in the lightning campaigns of 1939 and 1940, honed it in the endless steppes of Russia, and now carried the scars of Normandy's brutal summer. Tank commanders who could read terrain like a book. Gunners who could place a round through a church steeple at a kilometer. Drivers who could coax a 45-ton Panther through mud that swallowed lighter vehicles whole. They believed still in the old truths of armored warfare, concentration of force, speed, initiative at the lowest levels. The German way, Auftragstaktik, mission command, where a bold leader could turn defeat into victory with one decisive maneuver. They had done it before, at Sedan in 1940, at Kiev in 1941. Even as recently as the Kharkov counterstroke in 1943. Why not here? In command posts scattered through farm buildings and camouflaged half-tracks, maps glowed under hooded lamps. The plan, Operation Lüttich, had arrived the previous evening like a thunderbolt from the wolf's lair. Hitler himself had demanded it. The Americans had broken through at Avranches. Patton's Third Army was pouring southward, threatening to unhinge the entire German front in Normandy. The response, a sharp, concentrated counterattack westward from the Mortain area, seize the key ridges, drive to the sea at Avranches and cut the American supply lines, trap the spearheads, roll up the beachhead from the south. It was a gambler's throw, but not without logic. The American corridor was narrow, their forces were dispersed. Intelligence suggested the key height, Hill 317 overlooking Mortain, was held by only a single American battalion. If the Panzers could seize it quickly, the advance could proceed under its cover. Speed was the antidote to Allied air power. Move at night, strike at dawn. Keep moving. Bayerlein had protested. He knew better than most what clear weather meant in 1944. In North Africa, Rommel had once written that the side with air superiority wins the battle before it begins. In Normandy, the disparity was absolute. The Allies owned the sky completely during daylight. But the order was unequivocal. The attack is to be carried out with utmost vigor, regardless of losses from air attack. The decision in the West depends on its success. So the commanders prepared. They dispersed their columns, ordered strict camouflage discipline, planned short bounds from cover to cover, refueling points in deep orchards, anti-aircraft half-tracks interspersed. They told themselves that if they moved fast enough, the Jabos, Allied fighter bombers, would arrive too late, or in insufficient strength, that German flak could keep them high, that smoke pots and hedgerow cover could hide movement. In the hours before midnight on August 6th, the assembly began. Columns snaked westward through the darkness, headlights forbidden, drivers navigating by moonlight and memory, engines throttled low to minimize noise. Occasionally, an American patrol blundered into a roadblock and was brushed aside. Prisoners were taken, wide-eyed GIs who seemed surprised to see German armor still capable of offensive action. By 300 hours, most units had reached their forming-up points. The night was cool and quiet, broken only by the distant thump of artillery and the occasional drone of aircraft far overhead. Allied night bombers, perhaps, but nothing that threatened the ground forces directly. At 0430, the lead elements of Das Reich and Leibstandarte pushed into Mortain itself. Resistance was fragmented. American outposts fell back or surrendered. By 500, the town was in German hands. Hill 317 remained contested, but forward observers reported only light defenses. The initial objectives were falling almost on schedule. In Bayerlein's command vehicle, the radio net crackled with cautious reports. Objective Anton taken. Minimal resistance. Bridge at Sector Berta secured intact. Enemy withdrawing westward in disorder. A flicker of hope passed through the staff officers. Perhaps the Americans truly had been surprised. Perhaps speed was working. As the first true light of dawn crept over the horizon, the mist began to lift. The sky revealed itself, vast, empty, and perfectly, dangerously clear. Not a cloud from horizon to horizon. Visibility unlimited. Every veteran in a tank turret felt it immediately. A tightening in the gut, a glance upward. The same thought, unvoiced but universal. Clear weather. They will come. Bayerlein lit another cigarette, staring at the sky as if willing clouds to appear. He remembered Africa. He remembered how Rommel's attacks had withered under Malta-based aircraft. Here, the bases were only minutes away across the channel. Kurt Meyer, commanding a Kampfgruppe of the 12th SS nearby, barked at his driver, "Keep moving, no halts longer than necessary." He knew the doctrine. Once stopped, a column became a target. But orders were to consolidate briefly on the first objectives, regroup, then push west in strength. The narrow roads of the Bocage forced bunching. Refueling took time. Ammunition lorries had to catch up. Engines idled. Crews dismounted to stretch legs, to relieve themselves, to grab a quick swallow of ersatz coffee. Turrets traversed lazily, scanning for ground threats. Few looked upward, yet. The sun climbed higher. The sky remained mercilessly blue. And every commander, from battalion to division, knew exactly what that meant. The skies were clear, and every commander knew what that meant. 0600 hours. The sun was fully up now, a pale disk climbing through a sky still washed with blue. The German columns pushed westward out of Mortain in strength. Lead Panthers of the 2nd SS Das Reich crested the low ridges south of the town, turrets traversing, hunting for the next objectives. Behind them, the heavier Tigers of the attached Schwere Panzerabteilung 102 lumbered forward, engines straining against the steep Bocage lanes. Panzer-Lehr's Kampfgruppen fanned out to the north, probing for the road to St. Hilaire. The 1st SS Leibstandarte held the center, ready to exploit any breakthrough. For the first 30 minutes, everything felt almost normal. War as the Panzer Troop had always known it. American resistance was patchy. A few Shermans knocked out at long range, bazooka teams scattered by machine gun fire, infantry surrendering in orchards. Radios carried clipped, confident reports. Hill 285 secured, enemy retreating westward. Road junction at Le Mille in our hands, no serious opposition. In his command Panther, SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, leading the spearhead of Leibstandarte, allowed himself a tight smile. The Americans were still off balance. The thrust was gaining momentum. If they could keep this pace, Avranches might actually be reachable by nightfall. But the columns were already beginning to string out. The Bocage roads were narrow, sunken lanes barely wide enough for one tank, flanked by earthen banks topped with thick hedges. Overtaking was impossible. A single disabled vehicle could block an entire battalion. Refueling trucks lagged. Ammunition carriers struggled to keep up. Brief halts became inevitable. At 0630, the first Typhoons appeared. They came low and fast out of the east, 4 RAF rocket-armed Hawker Typhoons of No. 184 Squadron, skimming the treetops at 400 miles per hour. The pilots had been scrambled from an advanced landing ground in the Contenton, guided by a forward air controller attached to the U.S. 30th Infantry Division on Hill 317. The controller's voice had been calm, almost bored, over the radio net. Large concentration of enemy armor and soft vehicles moving west along road from Mortain to St. Hilaire. Good hunting. The Typhoons rolled in without warning. No preliminary circling. No hesitation. The lead pilot spotted the glint of steel in a sunken lane, the unmistakable boxy shapes of Panthers and half-tracks bunched at a crossroads. He toggled his radio, tally-ho, attacking. 8 60-pound rockets rippled off the rails of each aircraft in a single thunderous salvo. The noise reached the ground a split second later, a tearing, screaming howl that every German veteran knew instantly. Crews who had been standing beside their tanks dove for cover. Turret hatches slammed shut. The rockets struck in a tight pattern around the crossroads. One Panther took a direct hit on the turret ring. Secondary explosions ripped the tank apart in a bloom of orange flame and black smoke. 2 soft-skinned Opel trucks loaded with Panzer Grenadiers disintegrated. A Panzer IV slewed sideways, track blown off, blocking the lane completely. The Typhoons were gone as quickly as they had come, banking north, climbing for altitude, already calling for the next wave. On the ground, stunned silence lasted only seconds. Then shouting. Engines revving, crews scrambling back aboard. The column tried to move again, but the wreckage choked the road. Recovery vehicles nosed forward. Wounded were pulled from burning trucks. The smell of burning rubber and flesh drifted across the orchards. Higher up the chain, Bayerlein received the first damage reports. Multiple rocket attacks sector Dora. 3 tanks total losses, 5 soft vehicles destroyed, column temporarily halted. He acknowledged grimly. Expected. Unavoidable. But the advance must continue. Clear the road, keep moving, do not bunch up. By 700, the columns were rolling again. Faster now, drivers pushing engines hard, commanders standing in hatches scanning the sky as much as the ground ahead. Dispersion orders were repeated frantically over the radios. No unnecessary halts, no dismounting, yet the terrain betrayed them. Every narrow lane forced compression. Every crossroads demanded a pause to orient. Every disabled vehicle created a new magnet for attack. At 7:20, the second wave arrived. 6 Typhoons this time, from number 245 Squadron. Again guided by the same calm voice on Hill 317, enemy columns stalled 2 kilometers west of Mortain. Mixed armor and transport, engage at will. The rockets screamed down again. This time a Tiger took 2 direct hits, one on the engine deck, brewing the tank instantly. A fuel bowser exploded in a towering fireball that engulfed 2 half-tracks. Crews bailed out, running for the ditches, some on fire. A young lieutenant in Panzer-Lehr, commanding a platoon of Panzer IVs, felt the ground shake as rockets walked across his position. His tank survived, but the one behind him did not. Over the intercom, his gunner whispered, "They know exactly where we are. Every time we stop." The lieutenant keyed his microphone, voice steady by force of will. "All units, maintain momentum. Do not halt for any reason." But momentum was already slipping. Roads clogged. Detours through fields bogged down heavy tanks in the soft earth. Flak guns, 20mm and 37mm, fired skyward desperately, but the Typhoons came in too low and fast for effective fire. By 0800, the pattern was becoming clear. Every pause, every inevitable congestion invited destruction. The sky was no longer empty. Spotter aircraft circled high overhead. Oster light planes of the air observation posts, or American L-4 grasshoppers, invisible specks directing the killers below. A staff officer in Bayerlein's headquarters plotted the attacks on the map. Red arrows marking strike locations. They clustered exactly where columns had been forced to slow. Bayerlein stared at the map, then at the sky, visible through the half-track's open hatch. "They are not reacting to us. They are predicting us." Requests for smoke screens went out. Camouflage nets were hastily thrown over stationary vehicles. Some commanders ordered engines shut down under tree cover, hoping silence and stillness would hide them. But the observers above missed nothing. A column that halted to hide became a stationary target. Radios crackled with new calls. Enemy armor dispersed in Orchard Sector. Emil, recommend immediate strike. At 0845, another wave, 8 Typhoons this time. Rockets tore through the tree cover. Branches and steel fragments rained down. A Panther commander watching from his turret saw the rockets arrive like judgment itself. His tank rocked from a near miss. Shrapnel pinged off armor. The radio operator beside him screamed, clutching a shattered arm. The commander looked around. Smoke columns rising in every direction now. Wrecked vehicles burning quietly. Crews dragging wounded into hedges. We moved fast. We surprised them on the ground. And still, by 900, the advance had covered barely 5 kilometers beyond Mortain. Objectives that should have fallen by dawn remained in American hands. Hill 317 still flew the stars and stripes, its observers untouched, directing the sky's wrath with precision. In scattered command posts, the same uneasy realization began to form. This was not sporadic interference. This was rhythm, cycle, system. The first waves had been the lightest. More were coming. The sky was answering, not with fury, but with relentless mechanical patience. And the columns, once proud spearheads, now crawled forward under a blue dome that belonged entirely to the enemy. The rockets came, and nothing moved the same afterward. 1,000 hours. The Normandy sun beat down without mercy. From the ridges around Mortain to the valleys stretching west toward Bayerlein, the German advance had become a fractured thing. Columns broken into hesitant packets, tanks nosing forward in ones and twos through the Bocage, half-tracks lagging farther behind. Smoke rose in thin black pillars from a dozen points on the map, marking where the morning's optimism had already burned away. In the command posts, the radios never stopped. Request immediate smokescreen sector Friedrich, under heavy air attack. Fuel convoy destroyed. Repeat, entire convoy destroyed. Require alternate supply route. Multiple tanks immobilized. Recovery impossible under continuous observation. The voices were still disciplined, still German, clipped, precise, but the urgency beneath them was unmistakable. Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein stood in the open hatch of his half-track, map board balanced on the armor plate, field glasses around his neck. He had removed his cap, sweat traced lines through the dust on his forehead. Around him, his staff plotted the latest strike reports in red grease pencil. The pattern was no longer random. The attacks came every 15 to 20 minutes like clockwork. Not the same squadron, different markings, different numbers, but the same method. Low approach from the east or north, rockets in salvo, cannons if they felt safe, then sharp climb and departure. Gone before flak could track them properly. And always guided. High above, invisible to the naked eye, the spotter aircraft circled in lazy figure eights. Osters of the RAF's air observation posts, or American Peiper Cubs and L4s, flown by artillery officers who had become the eyes of the sky. They flew at 5,000 feet, too high for small arms fire, too slow and quiet for most crews to notice. From that altitude, the Bocage opened like a patchwork quilt. Every glint of steel, every dust cloud from tracks, every cluster of vehicles stood out plainly. The controller on Hill 317, captain of the U.S. 120th Infantry's observation team, sat in a foxhole ringed with sandbags, field telephone in one hand, radio microphone in the other. His voice remained flat, almost bored, as he passed coordinates. Grid 456782. Concentration of 20-plus vehicles, including armor, moving west along secondary road. Recommend rocket strike. Within minutes, the acknowledgement came from the RAF's Forward Control Center at Bayesonville Airfield. Roger. Cab rank established. First section attacking in 3 minutes. Cab rank. The phrase had entered Allied tactical vocabulary only months earlier, but it described the system perfectly. Typhoon squadrons orbited in relays, sections of 4 or 6 aircraft, waiting for targets like taxis at a stand. When one section expended its rockets and ammunition, it peeled off for home. Another took its place immediately. The airfields were close, advanced strips hacked out of fields just behind the beachhead, or longer bases across the Channel in southern England. Turnaround time, 45 minutes from landing to takeoff again. Fuel, rockets, pilots, all replenished faster than the Germans could repair a single-track link. On the ground, the panzer commanders began to grasp fragments of this machine. A battalion commander from Panzer-Lehr, his column pinned in an orchard outside Le Mesnil-Tove, watched the latest wave depart. He counted the seconds on his wristwatch. 19 minutes later, the next 4 Typhoons arrived. Different squadron markings, but the same deadly precision. Rockets slammed into the soft vehicles at the rear of his column. A munitions truck detonated, scattering shells like shrapnel grenades. 2 Panzer IVs brewed up in sympathy. He teed his radio. This is not random. They are rotating. They have unlimited aircraft. The reply from divisional headquarters was curt. Continue the advance. Speed is essential. But speed was no longer possible. Every attempt to push forward exposed movement. Every halt to regroup invited annihilation. The Bocage, once seen as cover, had become a trap. The high earthen banks hid tanks from ground observation but funneled movement into predictable lanes. The orchards offered shade but turned into killing boxes when aircraft dove through the gaps. By 1100 hours, the depth of the system became clearer. It was not merely air power. It was coordination on a scale the Germans had never faced. Forward air controllers, British, Canadian, American, were embedded with every frontline unit. They spoke directly to the orbiting cab ranks. Artillery observers on Hill 317 adjusted not just guns but aircraft. Radar stations on the ships offshore tracked incoming German movements and fed warnings. Ultra-intercepts, unknown to the Germans, had warned of Lüttich days in advance. The Allies had not been surprised at all. A young Hauptmann in the 116th Panzer Division, his Panther bogged in a ditch after a near miss, climbed out to survey the damage. From his position, he could see 4 separate smoke columns within 2 kilometers. He counted the attacks he had personally witnessed, 7 since dawn, each lasting less than a minute, each followed by a brief, terrible silence, then the scramble to move again. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and spoke to his crew. They don't need to beat us in battle. They just need to keep us moving or stopping. Either way, we lose. Higher up, the dread spread. Kurt Meyer, the fiery commander of the 12th SS Kampfgruppe, raged over the radio net. Where is our Luftwaffe? Where is the promised support? The answer, when it came, was bitter. The Luftwaffe in Normandy numbered fewer than 300 serviceable aircraft, most committed to defending the Reich against bombers. On this day, barely a dozen sorties reached the battlefield, and those were swept aside by swarms of Spitfires and P-51s. Bayerlein requested permission to shift the attack axis, to move under heavier tree cover, to disperse more widely. The response from 7th Army headquarters was immediate and inflexible. No change in plan. The Führer has ordered the attack to proceed on the designated routes with all available forces. Withdrawal or delay not authorized. By noon, the arithmetic was becoming undeniable. Morning strength reports had listed approximately 185 tanks and assault guns committed across the 4 main divisions. By 1200 hours, conservative estimates placed losses at 45 total write-offs, another 30 damaged and immobile. Soft vehicles, trucks, half-tracks, fuel bowsers were being erased at a far higher rate. Without them, the armor could not be supplied. Without fuel, the advance ended. Yet the attacks continued without pause. The sky never emptied. The cab rank rotated. Airfields in England and Normandy reloaded and relaunched. Pilots drank tea between sorties, climbed back into cockpits, flew the short hop across the channel, and struck again. A Typhoon pilot from No. 609 Squadron, banking away after his 3rd mission of the day, looked down at the patchwork of burning vehicles and thought, almost clinically, they can't hide, they can't run, they can't even stop. On the ground, a German crewman bailed out of a burning Panzer IV, rolled into a ditch, and lay there listening to the next wave approaching. The shriek of rockets was no longer startling, it was routine. He pressed his face into the earth and waited for it to pass. In scattered turrets and command vehicles, the same realization crystallized independently, almost simultaneously. This was not air support in the old sense. Squadrons scrambled in desperation to plug a gap. This was air dominance as a continuous process, a machine that fed on itself. Spotters to controllers to squadrons to airfields to factories and back again. A cycle that never broke. The pilots were skilled, yes, the rockets accurate, but the men dropping them were not the decisive factor. They were replaceable parts. The system was not. The tanks below, irreplaceable now, each one a masterpiece of engineering that Germany could no longer build in quantity, were being subtracted one by one. This wasn't air support. It was inevitability. 1300 hours. The hottest part of the day. The battlefield west of Mortain had become a tableau of paralysis. What had begun as a concentrated armored thrust was now a scattered collection of immobilized packets, tanks tucked under trees, half-tracks abandoned in ditches, crews huddled in hedgerows waiting for the next shriek from the sky. Movement had almost ceased. The roads were littered with wreckage. Burned-out Panthers with turrets blown askew, Tigers sitting on broken tracks, soft-skinned vehicles reduced to charred frames. Black smoke hung in layers, drifting slowly westward on the light breeze. In the command nets, the tone had changed. No longer the clipped confidence of the morning. Now the voices carried exhaustion, anger, and the first traces of desperation. Request permission to withdraw to night assembly areas. Continuing the advance is no longer possible. The request came from a Kampfgruppe commander of the 2nd SS Das Reich, his units pinned south of St. Hilaire. 3 times he had tried to push forward. 3 times the columns had been shattered within minutes. Fuel was critically low. Ammunition trucks had been priority targets all day. The reply from Panzer Group West headquarters was immediate and final. Negative. The attack will continue with all forces. No withdrawal authorized. The Führer has forbidden any retrograde movement. Similar exchanges echoed across the divisions. Bayerlein himself intervened, his voice hoarse over the radio. The divisions are being systematically destroyed in place. Without freedom of maneuver or supply, the operation cannot succeed. Recommend immediate suspension. The response, relayed from 7th Army and ultimately from the Führerhauptquartier, was uncompromising. The attack is to be pressed with utmost determination regardless of losses. Avranches must be reached. Regardless of losses. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. By early afternoon, the panzer commanders faced a paradox without solution. To move was to be seen, targeted, destroyed. To stop was to be seen, targeted, destroyed. The Bocage offered no refuge. The orchards had become crematoria. Even single tanks, dispersed and camouflaged, were hunted down by the relentless spotters overhead. A company commander in Panzer-Lehr watched from a ditch as his last operational Panther attempted to cross an open field toward better cover. The tank had barely traveled 200 meters when 4 Typhoons rolled in from the north. Rockets impacted in a perfect straddle. The Panther erupted in flame. The crew did not emerge. The commander stared at the burning hulk, then at his watch. The entire engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds. We are not fighting soldiers. We are being processed. Loss reports trickled upward, each one more grim than the last. By 1400 hours, Panzer-Lehr, once one of the most powerful divisions in the West, reported fewer than 30 tanks still operational out of the 80 it had committed at dawn. The 1st SS Leibstandarte was reduced to scattered platoons. The Zazreich had lost most of its soft transport. The remaining tanks were running on fumes. The 116th Panzer, committed on the northern flank, had advanced farthest but now sat immobilized, fuel exhausted, awaiting destruction. Supply had collapsed entirely. The unarmored trucks and half-tracks needed to bring forward fuel and ammunition could not move in daylight without being erased. Every attempt to run a convoy forward ended the same way: spotted, called in, obliterated. By mid-afternoon, divisional logs recorded over 100 soft vehicles destroyed, more than half the logistical tail. Command itself was fracturing. Radio vans knocked out, runners killed by strafing. Battalion commanders reduced to shouting orders across hedgerows. Higher headquarters issued demands that bore no relation to reality. Kurt Meyer, his uniform torn and soot-streaked, gathered the remnants of his Kampfgruppe in a sunken lane. Fewer than 20 tanks remained. He looked at his officers, young men who had believed in the invincibility of the Panzerwaffe, and spoke quietly. We can no longer attack. We can only try to survive until dark. But even survival was in doubt. The Typhoon waves continued without slackening. The cab rank rotated. New squadrons arrived as others departed for rearming. The pilots, many on their 4th or 5th sortie of the day, attacked with the same clinical efficiency. They did not gloat. They did not hate. They simply executed the process. On Hill 317, the American observers sipped coffee from thermos flasks and continued calling targets. Their position had been assaulted repeatedly by German infantry, but held. From its height, the entire battlefield lay open. They watched the German armor dissolve in real time. One controller, logging another successful strike, remarked to his sergeant, "They keep trying to move, then bunch up, then stop. Every time we get them." By 1500 hours, the attack had effectively ceased to exist as an organized effort. Units that still possessed mobility used it only to seek better concealment. Engines were shut down to reduce heat and noise. Camouflage nets draped over turrets. Crews dismounted and dug slit trenches nearby, waiting. The map at Panzer Group West still showed arrows pointing boldly toward Avranches. Objectives marked in blue grease pencil. Phases of advance neatly labeled. But on the ground, those arrows had no meaning. Bayerlein sat in his half-track, staring at the latest situation overlay. Red symbols, destroyed vehicles, outnumbered blue ones 3-1. He lit another cigarette, hands steady only through long practice. We planned for resistance on the ground. We prepared for anti-tank guns, for mines, for American armor. We did not prepare for annihilation from a system we cannot touch. A final plea went upward through the chain, permission to disengage under cover of darkness. Preserve what remained of the divisions for future defense. The answer, when it came hours later, was the same. Hold all positions gained. Prepare to resume the attack at first light. In the orchards and lanes west of Mortain, the surviving commanders received the order in silence. Some laughed bitterly. Others simply switched off their radios. The sun began its slow descent. The sky remained clear. The attacks continued, though less frequently now. Targets were becoming scarcer. By late afternoon, the great counteroffensive, the last major German armored attack in the West, existed only on paper. On the ground, it had been absorbed, erased, rendered irrelevant by a machine that never paused for breath. By afternoon, the attack existed only on the map. 1700 hours. The sun hung low over the Normandy hills, casting long shadows through the smoke. The battlefield west of Mortain was quiet now. Not the quiet of peace, but the exhausted hush that follows systematic destruction. Engines no longer growled in unison. Radios spoke only in whispers, if at all. The Typhoon waves had thinned as targets grew scarce and daylight began to fade. The cab ranks still orbited, patient, but the controllers on Hill 317 had fewer concentrations to call in. Single tanks, hidden under nets and foliage, scattered infantry in ditches. The great columns were gone. By sunset, the tally was complete. Of the approximately 185 tanks and assault guns that had rolled forward at dawn, fewer than 40 remained operational. Another 50 or so sat disabled, tracks blown, engines dead, turrets jammed, awaiting a night that might allow recovery or abandonment. The rest, over 100, were total losses. Brewed-up hulks littering the lanes and orchards. Some still smoldered. Others had burned out hours earlier, leaving only twisted steel skeletons. But the tanks were only the visible measure. The unseen losses were greater. Hundreds of soft-skinned vehicles, trucks, fuel bowsers, ammunition carriers, command cars had been erased entirely. Entire logistical tails wiped out. Without them, even the surviving armor was immobilized by morning. Panzer divisions that had entered the day as combined arms formations capable of operational maneuver were reduced to isolated strongpoints awaiting encirclement. Operation Lüttich had lasted less than 12 hours, from dawn assembly to sunset collapse. Avranches remained 30 kilometers away, untouched. The American corridor not only held, it widened hour by hour as Patton's divisions raced unhindered southward. In the gathering dusk, the surviving commanders walked among the wreckage. Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein moved slowly along a sunken lane lined with burned Panthers of his Panzer-Lehr division. Crews sat beside their ruined machines, faces blank with shock. Some smoked in silence, others stared at nothing. Bayerlein stopped beside one tank whose turret had been blown 20 meters away. The commander, a young Oberleutnant he had known since Africa, lay draped over the cupola, blackened beyond recognition. Bayerlein removed his cap. He had no words. None were needed. Nearby, a sergeant from a flak battery approached hesitantly. "Herr General, the men ask if we are to withdraw tonight." Bayerlein looked at him for a long moment. Permission had finally trickled down, an hour before sunset, too late to matter. The remnants could fall back under cover of darkness, preserve what little remained. "Yes," he said quietly. "We withdraw. What is left of us?" Meyer gathered his last operational vehicles in a deep orchard. 12 tanks, a handful of half-tracks, fewer than 200 men fit to fight. He addressed them without theatrics. "We attacked as ordered. We did everything that was asked, and it was not enough. Remember that." No one cheered. No one protested. They simply climbed aboard and prepared to slip away into the night. Years later, the survivors would speak of that day with a clarity born of distance. Bayerlein, in post-war interviews, said simply, "Mortain was not a battle in the classical sense. It was an industrial process applied to armies. We brought courage, skill, experience. They brought replacement capacity. There was no contest." A former Typhoon pilot, reflecting decades on, recalled the missions as almost routine. "We took off, attacked, landed, rearmed, took off again. The targets were always there. It didn't feel like heroism, it felt like turning a handle. The numbers told the rest. On August 7 alone, the RAF's 2nd Tactical Air Force flew over 2,000 sorties in direct support of the ground forces. Losses, fewer than a dozen aircraft, most to flak. Pilots and machines replaced within days. The factories in Britain and America continued turning out Typhoons, rockets, fuel, spares, faster than Germany could produce a single new Panther. The German losses at Mortain, approximately 175 tanks and assault guns destroyed or abandoned in 7 hours of daylight, were not merely tactical. They were irreplaceable. Germany's monthly tank production in August 1944 hovered around 300 Panthers and fewer Tigers. The Western Front alone had lost more than half that output in a single afternoon. The consequences unfolded swiftly. With the Panzer reserves shattered, nothing remained to block the American breakout. Patton swung wide. The Canadians pushed south from Seine. By mid-August, the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were trapped in the Falaise Pocket, a far larger killing ground where Allied aircraft repeated the Mortain pattern on an even greater scale. Tens of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, entire armies dissolved under the same relentless cycle. The Normandy campaign ended not with a decisive clash of armor, but with encirclement and annihilation from the air. Paris was liberated. The road to Germany lay open. In the end, the Panzer commanders understood what had truly defeated them. It was not American infantry, not British artillery, not even the Typhoon pilots themselves, who were brave men, but mortal and replaceable like any others. It was the system behind them, the forward controllers, the cab ranks, the rapid turnaround airfields, the radios, the spotters, the factories, the shipping lanes across an unthreatened Atlantic. A closed loop of production and destruction that operated without passion, without pause, without need for brilliance. Courage could not overcome it. Skill could not outmaneuver it. Doctrine collapsed beneath it. The tanks didn't just burn, they were replaced. And Germany wasn't. At sunset on August 7th, as the last survivors slipped eastward through the darkening Bocage, the sky finally emptied. The engines that had ruled battlefields for 5 years fell silent. The age of maneuver gave way to the age of sustainability. The battle lasted 7 hours. The realization lasted forever. Modern war is won by replacement, not bravery. Skill fails when time belongs to the enemy. Mortain proved tanks cannot outrun systems. The tanks didn't just burn. They were replaced, and Germany wasn't. If you believe forgotten truths of World War II deserve telling, subscribe for more untold history.